Hello ladies and gentlemen, what is going on? It's your boy S04, welcoming you to our second Anarchy analysis series of the week. We are covering Schalke and SK in this matchup in the lower bracket of the LEC. And for this first game, we have SK on the blue side of things. We have Schalke on the red half, and we're going to be jumping straight into picks and bans. So DJ, spin the dial, let us load up, and we're going to start this off right now. SK decide to ban out the Akali, Shen and Camille, and Schalke ban out the Kate, the Thresh and the Set. We're seeing a lot of OPs from the LCS's series, and these bans should realistically be continued through the entire series. Akali, very powerful, obviously, receiving a few buffs in a few patches in a row. Shen, been very prevalent in that top side for most teams, obviously is considered the most powerful top laner because of the map presence he grants, because you technically have 2 TPs in your kit and essentially can split push the map with a bit more ease than most split pushing comps. The last ban is that Camille for SK, so they're kind of hinting that they want to play maybe a Jax, maybe a Renekton, something that's safe that cannot be countered by Camille. And as such, I like that ban from SK. It does though leave quite a few ADCs open, and the only one that's banned out in this game is the Caitlyn, who Schalke ban, obviously a very siege heavy champion that obviously will poke you down with ease. The ace in the hole gets chucked out quite a lot by teams to just essentially harass you and keep you away from the fight. And as such, I like that ban from Schalke. It would have obviously have probably been first pick for SK if it was low up. And the Thresh and the Set ban. Set has received some changes in recent weeks, especially on this patch, where he's been flexed into the mid lane, as well as being a jungle and support and top pick. He's got a lot of flexes essentially, and it's being put into mid lane a bit more often than normal, and as such, I like this ban from Schalke. Thresh, very strong support. Considering Limit likes to be a strong playmaker, I like that ban considerably from Schalke, and as such, these bans make a lot of sense from both teams. There is still Kalista available for the two teams. Ezreal, one of Crown Shot's big picks. Yumi also is up, so technically SK could go for a Twitch Yumi combo that they decimated a team on. I forget who they played against, but that combo came out, I think it might have been Vitality, and destroyed them with. But yeah, let us load into the first round of picks and see how these teams adapt to the playstyles and the picks that come through. So we jump into probably the most interesting pick phase in the Anarchy analysis history. We start with Lil Isla picked up for SK, and this is quite an interesting one because it can be flexed between the top and the jungle. I do believe the day before this game it was played in the LCS's playoffs, and it was played in the top side, and it's been more preferable in the jungle in the LEC. I know Shadows rocked this pick and he did it very nicely, and it's very good at chasing down targets and being this late game carry, something that Trick is known for being. As for the response from Schalke, they go with the Senna, and alongside it they go for the opposite of the Fawn that SK have. They go for the full-blown Horse of the Hecarim. I like this combo for Schalke because it means that the Senna has got an AD sort of damage dealer in the jungle, and she can essentially go for this more supportive S build that they tend to go for and scale up with soul pickups. And also having the heal ability and the shielding, it's a very more supportive ADC that does have a lot of damage. As such, the Heca works around this very nicely, obviously diving into the backline, so having the Dawning Shadow ultimate from Senna over the top means that it's going to be a lot of power as the onslaught of shadows tears through this SK lineup. Now the last two picks in this phase 4 SK is actually where the interesting things come through. Jinx is picked for Crown Shot here, a very aggressive turret taking champion, as well as a very damage heavy ADC in team fights. If this Jinx gets hyper, she goes off in fights. And if she goes off in fights, that usually ends her taking objectives very quickly. And it works very nicely in terms of this objective taking team comp that SK have drafted so far. With that Ziggs going in alongside it with the satchel charge, you can essentially see here that SK kind of want to play the map. And with the Lila also locked in, you've essentially got a very good chase down squad for SK here. If the Jinx is able to land a zap, then into the Lila, you're essentially locking down a target you can just essentially burst down with the Jinx damage, and Jinx gets hyper and then tears up a team fight. So I like this comp coming out from SK, and the synergy between the Ziggs, the bomb, his ultimate, and the Jinx ult, and the Lila sleep. You essentially can charge them abilities up, fire them at a location, waiting for the sleep to put the target to bed, and then them ults just do wombo combo of damage on a defensive target. And I like that combo from SK coming through. It works very nicely. Whether or not they can actually use this effectively is going to be down to how they build their front line. Obviously with a tank's top laner and a support that's going to be probably a playmaker to set it up to allow some of these plays to come through, it would be realistically smart. Now, the last pick in this phase is the Nautilus for Schalke. Dreams is essentially a very good Nautilus. He's very good at using his depth charge and the dredge line combination to essentially lock up the target and burst them down with ease. As such, I like this pick for Schalke, as Senna with Hecker and Nort can essentially lock up a target for days, pulling them in and essentially executing them off before they can realistically do anything. Now, like how what I just did with SK, describing how they all combine together and what realistically they need to draft, Schalke need to draft some AP and realistically aim for a very strong mid lane pick that's blind pickable here, or they choose the counter pick for their mid lane instead of focusing in on a top lane pick. I would honestly assume that Schalke should pick probably a very strong blind pickable top as their round to pick, maybe even a tank to steal away that option for SK. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they do this. So, we enter the second ban phase here, and Schalke do the smart thing. They ban away safe blind pickable top laners, as well as a tanky one in the Scion, and the GP obviously being a very strong blind pick top laner for Genax. And realistically, the only good options left open by Schalke is the Ornn, or maybe an Urgot for SK, but obviously it would work quite well. But you would be essentially relying on a major amount of damage dealers on SK that doesn't have too much bulk, so you may see something along those lines. As for SK, they ban out the Zoe, they ban out the LeBlanc, so options for Abadage have gone down considerably, and considering the fact that Abadage is a phenomenal Zoe player, he's one of the only two people in the LEC to get a win on this champion, and LeBlanc being such a good burst heavy mage, and the burst heavy AP damage on the Schalke side is lacking at this stage, I like this ban coming through for SK, and as such, these two bans are probably the best things that SK have done so far in this draft. So, let us get into this last round of picks. We start with Schalke actually locking a very safe mid laner in the Orianna. It was not banned, and this works very nicely with their comp, because you can stick the ball on top of the Hecker, you can stick it on top of the Nautilus, they can go directly into the backline of SK, and there's a massive shockwave just waiting to happen. They just run the ball in and essentially lock you down, and it adds to the amount of CC that's already drafted by Schalke, and I love this pickup because of that. As such, the response from SK is the Morgana, they kind of want to eliminate the pick potential that Heka wants to go for. And I don't know, I don't like this too much. I mean, yes, it does kind of nullify the effectiveness of the Nautilus, but as a whole, I wouldn't say this is good. I would honestly say I would pick maybe a Bard here to kind of nullify the charge through that a Heka can do, can nullify the effectiveness of certain champions. So as such, I would honestly say, I would have to say this Morg pick isn't the best, but it does make sense obviously with Delilah wanting to run in as well. Put the black shield on her so she can run straight through your opposition. Now, the last pick for SK, I'm not too fond of either. It has to be the Volibear pick that, yes, is a strong duelist. Yes, can be kind of strong in gaining a lane advantage. And it does also put a bit of a question on where Delilah is going, because technically it still can be flexed with Volley being such a strong jungle pick, and Lila also being a strong jungle pick. It depends how SK want to play this game, so I guess it makes sense. But if you wanted a strong top laner that could essentially make this team comp work, I would have probably gone for the Ornn here. You would have had the Call of the Forge God, which obviously you can charge up to essentially knock people up and lock them up. As such, I realistically would prefer the Ornn over the Volley, but it's a pick that works, I guess. Last pick in this game, though, is for Schalke. It is the Renekton, and this makes sense to me because it works very well in terms of flanking and essentially getting onto the Jinx and the Ziggs, who are, unless they're getting kills, very immobile, and as such, I like this, and it works well. It will do well into the Volibear in lane. Obviously, you can just heal up through all his damage, and as such, I'm gonna have to say I like this pick, and it rounds out this Schalke draft very nicely in terms of bursting you out and doing a lot of damage. Without further ado, let us load into the game and break down this last team fight for game number 1. So the first play we get in this series was started by SK, so the reason they started is because they only see 2 champions of Schalke in the mid lane, with 4 of SK's members ready to pounce. Limit uses Shurelya's to speed up Delilah to land her Q to get the play going. The lilting lullaby puts the Senna and the Nautilus to sleep, and in comes the Mega Inferno book for Senna to eat up. But Senna uses her cleanse, and now it's time for the turnaround. Renekton and Ori TP in, as Nautilus goes golden, and the Dawning Shadow chunks down SK's bot lane. Now, with Renekton joining the fight, and Hecarim charging forward via an onslaught of shadows at Jinx, she's forced to stopwatch to avoid the full blowout of damage. However, all the damage that from Renekton and Hecarim that would have come through is used to instead kill off the Morgana. Because of the deficit in men count now, SK's forced backwards, and the issue for them is Crown Shot is in status still from the stopwatch burnage, and once he comes out of that, he's in the front line of Schalke. Essentially, he has no protection, he is killed off, and then from there, both teams look to actually disengage the fight. But here's the clutch play in this all for me. Abadage flashes forward and executes Lila with his ball. And you're probably wondering, why is that so big? Well, Lila is the jungler for SK, and with her dead, it essentially means the Baron is a free objective for Schalke to take, and when they take it, they're able to win this game in a much more convincing fashion than if they allowed the Lila to live, and they probably would not have got the Baron if it was not done. Game 2, blue side sees SK returning with Schalke on red, and I'm going to be very quick on these picks and bans. Starting with the bans, they stay exactly the same as game 1, and to recap, it's Akali, Camille, Thresh, Caitlyn, Set and Shen all being banned out, so these two teams may be looking for the salty runback. We'll just have to see after the first picks by either side, and hopefully you see some change coming out from SK, considering the fact that the first game's draft did not work for them. Hopefully they go for something a bit more removable. Anyway, we'll load into our first picks here, and we start with the Yumi, actually being locked in for SK. Big change here because it changes the dynamic of the squad. Yumi, very strong in terms of providing heals to match essentially the Senna lock-in that's almost guaranteed to be locked in by Schalke, and as such, I like this pick. Obviously the Prowling Projectile allows a lot of poke and harassment, and essentially what you're saying to Schalke is, look, you need to take Ez, otherwise we're getting this very powerful combo in the Yumi and the Ezreal. That being said, Schalke log in the exact same two first picks from game number 1, the Senna and the Hecarim. They feel this is a far better combination than that bot lane combo that's built to poke you down, and realistically I do not disagree with how they played this. Senna won them the game with the amount of sustain that she provides to the team, and Hecarim being able to just run you down and do so much damage in the late game is why Schalke managed to beat this SK lineup. That being said, the Ezreal does come through for SK, so they have a bit of a better bot lane in my opinion to what they had in game 1, because the Jinx and the Morg didn't do too much for them in terms of late game prowess, and as such I like this pick a lot more. It has a 2-item power spike that makes this champion very powerful, and as such, the champion that they pair it with in the top side is actually really impressive because it is a GP. Blind pick GP is probably one of the best blind pick top laners in the game. Huge amount of burst, huge amount of CC in his, well, no CC in his kit actually. He has Cleanse built into his kit. He has a global ult, which is very powerful nowadays with the fact that people want to be running champs like Shen, champs like Galio and TF, so I like this pick a whole lot to kind of match the TP threats and globals of them champions without having to leave his lane. Now the last pick do we need to talk, well, very little about, because it's the returning pick of Nautilus for Dreams. This pick did wonders in game number 1, and in this game I think he's going to have a very good time on this pick, as Schalke have not changed at all since game number 1's draft. So, we get to our first big changes in bans from these two teams. More specifically, the bans that Schalke go for is the Skana and the Sejuani. They're targeting Trick's champion pool. They want him onto something like, say, a Kha'Zix that's available, or something along those lines, something that's a bit more assassiny where he has to force plays in order to actually do things. There is still technically the Graves available to him if he wants it, but the other response is the Vlad and the Yazir ban from SK. Odawame has whipped out the Vlad before. He's been able to use it as a very powerful carry. He's used it to, you can use it also to get into the back line and basically threaten this Yumi and this Ezreal with a bit more ease. Obviously you can go underneath the GP barrels. It's a big counter pick to GP as a whole, so I like this ban coming through from SK. And the last ban, Yazir, which we just highlighted, I like because it removes Abadage's safety, though he does have big picks like the Orianna still available to him that carried in game 2, as well as the Zoe which is available, and Fakadage could realistically pull that out. As we look at our last round of picks here, we actually see the Orianna come through for him that we realistically expected. Schalke are not changing up how their squad looks from game number 2. Obviously the top-side matchup doesn't even need to change here, and the Orianna works so well with the Hecarim. It is a very strong squad that they're drafting so far. SK's last 2 picks is the Lee Sin and Syndra, so they got a playmaker and jungler, kind of something that Schalke wanted. They didn't want SK having that much bulk, and realistically with the squad they have, there isn't that much actual tankiness, so it makes it very easy for this Hecarim to charge through this lineup and actually do work. And honestly, I'm surprised the Galio didn't come through here, or maybe even a Rammus. I know Rammus is not even in the meta, but it would have been a better pick in my opinion for either Zazie or Trick, because you can actually taunt up the Hecarim, stop him from getting into your backline, and essentially keep your carry safe. And I would have preferred something like that in order to make this SK team work and have a bit of bulk in the tankiness. As a whole, this lineup is going to get ran over by the choo-choo train in the top lane in the Scion. Full bulky tank, full damage cap being unleashed if he goes for the damage build. Obviously, it's very rare, I know, but Titanic Hydra with the W is super duper strong on a Scion, and Scion's been coming back into meta because of this. He's very powerful. I love this pick for Schalke, and as a whole, I think yet again Schalke have won the draft. Obviously, the squad for SK's got a lot of work to do. I guess they've gone for a bit more of a safer team than what they had in game number 1, but I think it still favours Schalke here, and I don't know how SK are going to do in order to actually stop this. Nonetheless, let us load into the game where we see SK take on Schalke. This play, instead of looking at the entire team fight bit by bit, we're actually going to focus in on a player's champion. And today we're looking at the Hecarim of Gilius. Now, before we get into any of the actual action, we need to discuss how Hecarim works and how he wants to play. Firstly, Hecarim is a champion who wants to run at you with a devastating charge, that is his E, and essentially do that from a long distance to build up the more damage that ability has. Then he'll burst you with his Q, which is called Rampage, which is a spinning of his axes or his mace, whatever his tool is, and he then either wants to ult, going further into your team, fearing up the targets that are hit by it, or use his ult defensively to get away and then use his W, which is called the Spirit of the Dread, which allows him to heal up for the amount of damage that's done in that circle to every single target. It's basically an AoE healing effect. And that's essentially how this champion works. And let's actually jump into this first play. Now, let's take a look at Gilius's play. It starts with him in the SK red buff jungle. Schalke head to the mid wave in order to fight the SK team. He targets the Lee Sin because he's slightly away from his team and realistically is closer to the Schalke base. He uses his devastating charge, but Lee Sin just hops back to his team and Hecarim rejoins his team to rebuild up his Dead Man's Plate charge. When ready to go back in, he uses his E yet again and targets the Ezreal who is on the backside of the fight, and this also pulls the aggro of the Syndra, which is very vital to this actual fight, as this essentially means that the two big damage dealers on SK's side are focusing a Hecarim. Knowing this, Gilius disengages with his ult as Syndra ults him, thus allowing him to recharge his Deadman's Plate and look for another engage. He comes in back in trying to execute Ezreal, who disengages over the wall with his arcane shift, but it isn't enough to save him. Now, him and Sion are left to fight the GP and the Syndra of SK, and they immediately kill off the GP, and it's then just left with the Syndra, whom we need to discuss how Hecarim plays around her. So, knowing Syndra's ult's down, Hecarim begins his charge towards her. He dodges a W, he baits out the flash with his E, and then runs past her, pushing her back with the actual E's second half cast, thus executing her in a devastating fashion, and then the team walks down mid, takes the inhib turret and the inhibitor, as well as the Nexus turrets, winning this game. Even if they do give over Mountain Soul, it doesn't mean much, as Schalke go up 2-0 in this series over SK Gaming. Welcome to Game 3, Schalke on blue, SK on red. They chose red. It's going to be essentially very important here because we see a mass change of bans here. So Schalke keep the set and the thrash band, whereas SK change up their entire band setup here. They ban out the Hecarim, the GP, and the Caitlyn. They take the Caitlyn instead of what S04 took, and instead Schalke ban out Yuumi. So Yuumi we've discussed before, Hecarim we've discussed before, and GP we've discussed before. And these bans coming through are actually quite important here, because it's nice to note that the big powerful picks of the Hecarim has been removed from the field, but I don't get why SK banned out the GP, considering the fact that they're the ones who have been running it in this series. Now we get into our first round of picks, and Schalke focus the center. It's worked for them all previous games that they've had, so they take it yet again and hope that they can get something that's a big playmaker alongside it. Now, what we see is SK actually getting the Shen. Obviously, they banned it out in the previous two games, and it's been picked up here, which I like. That being said, I don't like their next pick, the Kog'Maw. I don't like it being shown this early, and realistically, it's only good as an AP mid laner. It loses a lot of power if it's played in the bot lane, and realistically is very, very unsafe as a champion to be picked, especially when you know Schalke are gonna pick this Nautilus for Dreams, who's played phenomenal with this pick, and this Azir, which is kind of locked in to essentially say, hey, I'm gonna have this counter on you. And Azir works very well onto the Kog'Maw because he can just use his Emperor's Divide to push you back into his team with ease if he can get in range, and it's a very easy thing for him to do. Now, the last pick of this phase is the Morgana. I don't like this coming through. Yes, it's good against Nautilus, yes, you can nullify a lot of CC, but Morg is more of a second round pick as a support. You could either have gone with the Bard and have a bit more objective control, which I would have preferred, or you can stick with this Morg. Now, looking at the next round of picks for round number 2, we see Lee Sin banned out by SK. They're not letting their playmaker from game 2 come through. I don't get why you would ban that out. Yeah, they're banning out their own picks. Camille is returning back to this ban phase, even though it was ban 1. It was phase 1 ban in the past, but we do end up seeing Ori and Syndra banned out by S04. Obviously, they control the Azir, and they kind of want to force the positioning of Kog into the mid lane or into the bot lane it depends. They're more focusing on the bot lane because they expect that cog to go into Crown Shot's back pocket, hence why they're banning out mid laners. Because they don't think that Zazie can actually play this champion. And as such, it's obvious they ban out these safe mid laners so that they can essentially play up against it very easily. Now, I like this from Schalke. It's probably from knowledge of scrims, and realistically, it makes a lot of sense to do that, especially considering the Morgana has been locked in already for the support pool, and topside is favourable. Now, if I was SK, I would have probably banned instead of Lee Sin, maybe a Jax or something along those lines that can essentially play counter to the Shen, like even Renekton would do work. But we end up seeing the Ziggs returning to the draft here for SK. Obviously, that hints to me, and it does reveal that the Kog'Maw is going into the bot lane, and realistically, SK have thrown all their cards on the table way too early, and I do not like Kog in the bot lane, as it's basically the weakest version of Kog because you're going full AD, especially considering you have a Morg and a Ziggs. Now, the response from Schalke is the Vladimir and the Kha'Zix. A very strong jungler for Gilius, who's carried on this champion many times before, and considering the Vlad has been locked in, this damage sourcing for Schalke is huge. Like, you've got 2 AP champions, 2 AD champions, it's a lot of damage that's very, very potent and can do a lot of work, considering that the Vlad can have easy access into the backline with a Sangway pool, and there is very little CC bar the Morg binding and a satchel charge from this SK team, and this Jarvan, if it's locked in, I do not like. The Volibear is a bit better in my opinion, but it is going to be this Volley locked in. And I would have preferred, say, a Graves or a carry-oriented jungle, and something that can provide a bit of AP damage, because you look at this AD damage I would prefer, because you look at this SK side, Shen probably going to go quite tanky so that you can sustain through damage, considering the fact that in the previous 2 games SK have had a really weak front line. The Volibear, probably more tanky, even though he'll do a bit of AP damage. Ziggs, full AP. Kog'Maw is going to be forced to go AD, and that does not live up to his strengths, and Morg is AP/supportive. Nonetheless, these drafts are done. I do believe Schalke got the better hand on this yet again, but there's not much more to say as we'll load up onto the Rift for Game 3 of Schalke vs SK. Our last play, we are going to look at SK's bot lane and their low mobility and tools that they have. Essentially, we start the play with Kog having lane push because of his dominance in his abilities, and thus it makes it very easy for him to control lane against the Senna. With both junglers hovering around this lane, Schalke make the first play with Azir TPing in from the mid lane in order to start a play. Morgana lands a binding before the Azir gets here onto Nautilus and thus gives over first blood as the Ziggs TPs into this bot lane. That's followed up by a double kill over to the Azir, and because of that sweep and the fact that it forces a flash out of Kog, who is unable to get away, it essentially gives over 3 kills to this Azir, and thus it makes it very hard for SK to do anything in this game, and thus realistically controlled the entire tempo of this matchup from basically the first few minutes of the game. And because this Kog'Maw has been put behind already, which is not going to be getting that much stronger in terms of itemizations until about 4 items, realistically this Azir, who's probably going to be very close now to his Nash's Tooth, will essentially control the tempo and will outpace this Kog'Maw in terms of scaling up. And from there, Schalke win the game. It's fairly simple, there's not much more to say, and Abadage Zazir was phenomenal through this entire game. As we see in this play that's probably playing right now on your screen, he just decimated this SK lineup, and as such, he won this game for his team and took Schalke through to the lower bracket semi or quarterfinal. And yeah, phenomenal plays from this Schalke squad. They're looking phenomenal this season in terms of the second half of this split, and in this playoffs they look dominant against a shaky SK. Nevertheless, that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed it, leave a like down below, subscribe if you're new around here if you want to, and I will see you guys later. Peace out.